What is the single unique experience that all human beings have around the world at any given point of time? Something that we all experience no matter which age we belong to, which class, caste, gender, race, ethnicity. Waiting, the experience of waiting. We know what waiting is, right? But we do not know who Godot is. Even Vladimir and Estragon have no clue about it. They think he might have answers to their questions. So they wait. And they talk about waiting. In meaningless repetition, they pass the time. We wait too. We consider quitting, but unsure of what else to do, we stick to waiting. This is Monami Mukherjee, and today we will dive into the absurd and try to have a sneak peek at the backstage of Samuel Beckett's tragicomedy. He was an Irishman born in Dublin in April 13, 1906. He was educated at Trinity College in Dublin, where he studied Italian, French and English literature. Later on, he moved to Paris, and around 1930s, he started writing in Paris. What did Paris look like back then? Paris was a very interesting milieu at that time. Paris was at that time a melting pot of philosophers, of intellectuals who were about to shape the way literature would be produced, the way art would be produced. On one hand, you had Picasso painting and his cubism. And on the other hand, you have Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and people like Albert Camus. So out of these people, I'm going to talk about only 3 persons who will be very important if we are to understand Beckett and how his work shaped the course of English drama. First one is Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a French philosopher, political activist, and of course a writer. It is considered to be a leading figure of existentialism. What is existentialism? Existentialism is an idea that this whole world is not explained by any theories. It's basically random, meaningless. And it is the responsibility of the individual to make sense of it. He essentially says that existence precedes essence. What is essence? Essence is innate human qualities. Some people feel that when we are born with qualities that make us what we are. But existentialists believe that no, we exist, then those qualities are developed according to our choices, according to our ways of looking at the world. So everybody is born in a same way. They begin as a blank slate. Sartre also talks about the idea of bad faith. What is bad faith? Suppose something wrong goes on in your life and you tend to pass the blame to fate, to destiny, to actions by other people. So this tendency to not take responsibility of your actions or the consequences which happen because of your actions, that is called bad faith according to the existentialists. So this is a philosophy that was developing in France during 1930s. The other end is seen in works of Albert Camus. Although many people say that Camus has existentialist streak in his writings, but Camus himself did not want to be considered to be an existentialist. He was the propounder of absurdism. What is absurdism according to Camus? He says that yes, existentialists are right in saying that the world is meaningless, but they are wrong in thinking that individual actions can make sense of this meaningless world. Because this is absurd. Absurd means what? Something which is illogical, which is irrational, something which cannot be explained. So absurd is something which is not explainable. And therefore, what is the solution here? Camus feels that the only way to reach some kind of purpose in life is to accept the absurdity of life itself, of existence itself. The third person who is of great interest here is James Joyce. Now, just like Beckett, Joyce was also born in Dublin. He came to Paris in around 1920s. He was mostly influenced by the idea of Friedrich Nietzsche. Maybe sometime we'll have some discussion on Nietzsche and his idea of Übermensch or Superman. In Joyce, we also find the same kind of idea that the world cannot be explained by these grand narratives such as religious scriptures or philosophies or isms in that sense. And meaning of life, purpose of life can be understood by an individual according to his or her inclinations. So here also we find a parallel thinking process with existentialists. He talks about subjective reality, individual perspective, and therefore he develops the style of stream of consciousness, interior monologue, where the story which we see is basically formed through these thought processes of characters rather than actual actions, empirical actions that take place in real world. So these three people, what are they giving us? They are giving us this idea that this world is basically not very organized. It's not planned. And they certainly disregard the idea of God. So if there is no God, how do we make sense of things? How do we understand what purpose means for us? Now, Albert Camus, he actually used the word absurd first in his writings, and it was in a very specific sense in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. It was in 1942. Note the year. This was the time when the Second World War has already started. And Camus and Sartre, they were both a part of the resistance in occupied France, and they saw suffering in a way that we cannot even begin to understand. There was this war going on, and there was this superpower nation emerging, Germany, and there was no way that they could see France defeating that superpower. So it was a losing battle that they knew they were fighting, and that sense of despair. And yet they tried to find out that despite that despair, like every day they had this feeling that today is going to be the last day when we'll meet our end. And still every day they had to go on. So this idea of finding purpose in an apparently meaningless space, this gave Camus the kind of idea which he writes about in Myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was this person who was cursed that he would go to the underworld and there would be this rock. He would roll the rock up the mountain every day, and at the end of it, when the rock reaches the top of the mountain, it would roll back down, and Sisyphus would have to climb down and start his work again, and this would go on forever. And Camus, he asks us to look at the figure of Sisyphus, not when he is rolling the stone up. There he has a purpose. He wants us to look at Sisyphus when he is climbing down. He knows that he has to again engage in that futile activity, the repetitive activity, but he has no choice right now. So what does he do? He has actually two choices. He can do it in despair, or he can simply enjoy doing it. So this whole situation that Sisyphus finds himself in is an absurd situation, meaningless situation, illogical situation. And this, according to Camus, is the reality. In 1942, this appeared to be reality to him. When it comes to the phrase, the theatre of the absurd, then we should know about Martin Esslin, who was the first one to use this technical term in order to refer to the plays written by people like Beckett. So in his essay, Theatre of the Absurd, Estragon points out certain characteristics of these plays which make them absurd plays. Okay. So if we are to look at the key points that Martin Estragon makes about absurd drama, the first one is, of course, there is a rejection of traditional conventions and there is a disconnection between the individual and the world. That is, the characters portrayed in these plays, they appear to be disconnected from their own lives. They appear to have kind of no past and no future, and in a kind of a temporal stasis, as if frozen in time, disconnected from action. And of course, there is a complete disregard of traditional or conventional ways of writing plays. Second thing, so of course, there is a very intimate connection between absurdism and existentialism, although there is this very subtle difference, as I have already told you, but primarily both of them suggest that the world is meaningless. Another key point that Martin Estragon makes is that the plot structure is often not linear. Linear means you begin at a certain point and you go front in time. Here, everything is maybe even in a cyclical pattern, repetitive pattern. You lose connection with the idea of uniform movement of time. So the playwright plays with the idea of time or changes in time when it comes to the plot. And even there is no rigid plot structure also observed here. And since absurd plays are kind of, you can say, theatrical representation of stream of consciousness technique, which we find in fiction, therefore, a lot of symbols and imagery has to be used, sometimes in the form of props that are there on stage, sometimes certain actions which the people perform or the characters perform, maybe the kind of dress they are wearing, the kind of words they use. So they are loaded with symbolism. There is also a lot of emphasis on language. Why did the absurdist playwrights, they try to bring in new kind of language? Because language is something through which grand narratives of this world have explained meanings. So if we use the same kind of language which have been used by earlier dramatists, even modern dramatists, then we can never talk about new experiences. And therefore, there is a great shift in the way language is used in these plays. And when you will read Godot with me, you would feel relieved. I felt relieved when I was a student that the language was so simple. We didn't have any difficulty understanding the literal meaning of the language that we see in Godot. And here I want you to understand one thing, that this play was written by this Irishman in French. Why did he decide to write in French? Well, for one, he wanted to lose the baggage, the burden of tradition that English language represented for him. So he wanted to deliberately break away from everything conventional which is represented by the English language. So he chose French. Sadly, we have to read it in English, but still, when you will read it, you will understand that it's different from the kind of English which we usually find in playwrights such as George Bernard Shaw or J.M. Synge, who originally wrote in English, for that matter, during the modern period. Finally, what is the focus of absurd drama? The focus is human condition. So it is not anti-man, it is not anti-existence. Absurd drama will be about human beings, but it will not be some pretense. It will not give you any character which is larger than life, because that would be a false impression of humanity. It will not give you a character who is holier than everybody. So of course, we will not have the great tragic heroes here. So what do we have here? We have characters like Estragon and Vladimir, the two trumps. Now, what are trumps? I think this image will make it easier for you to understand. Think about Charlie Chaplin. You have seen Charlie Chaplin movies. So the kind of character which Charlie represents is a trump's character. We don't know the past of that character. We don't know the future. We do not know from where he comes. He doesn't have any belongings. He just moves around experiencing life, existing. So here we have the story of two trumps. Now, if I were to give you the gist of the story, it is very difficult. See, the gist of the story can be given in 3 lines. 2 acts. In both acts, same things happen. Estragon and Vladimir wait for somebody called Godot. In the meantime, 2 more characters come in, Lucky and Pozzo. And finally, we see that Lucky and Pozzo, they go out and Estragon and Vladimir are left waiting. This is the story. Trust me, there's nothing more to it. So why will we read it? Why do we watch theatre? Why do we read plays? To get aesthetic pleasure. How do we get that? Through experiencing the language that is used. In this play, what is the central focus then? Like, what is it about then? This play is not about Godot. It's not even about understanding who Godot is. This play is about seeing these 2 characters doing what they do while they are waiting for Godot. Sometimes they do not have answers like what would they ask Godot, what arrangements they had with Godot. Sometimes they are even confused about whether it's the right place to wait for Godot, whether it's the right time or not, whether it's the right day. Did they actually have appointment this day? They suffer from dementia. They have forgotten where they were, and they do not have any sense of the passage of time too. The only thing that we see they remember is the fact that they are going to wait for Godot, and somehow it is heartening to see that they might forget everything, but they never forget each other. Estragon never forgets Vladimir. Vladimir never forgets Estragon. This play is like existence itself. This play is like the world itself. Meaningless, chaotic. It's up to you to find the meanings. I will read it along with you, but I do not know if my readings, my understanding will match yours. It doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you an interesting story about the first production of Waiting for Godot. It was around 1950s in Paris. That Paris, which was the seat of intellectual perfection, you can say. The theatre lovers, they flocked to see the play. But it was hated by most. They couldn't make out, the audience couldn't make out what it was about, and they felt in fact offended, as if this was a waste of time. This was like Beckett was playing tricks with them. The same kind of reception was seen in America, everywhere where this produced or presented, and there were these conventional theatre goers. It did not receive a warm reception at all. Not until it was shown in front of a group of convicts of a maximum security prison. Nobody expected them to understand anything. Nobody expected them to appreciate the nuances of language which a play has. They were convicts awaiting sometimes life sentences, sometimes death sentences, and then when they watched that play, they all responded with a sense of awareness, understanding what the play is about. They could connect, they could understand the despair, the idea of waiting, and the idea of futility of waiting, because they didn't have the luxury of explanation. They didn't have the luxury of conclusion. Their wait was almost forever, just like Vladimir's and Estragon's. And why couldn't these sophisticated audience understand this? Do they not also wait for things? Do we not wait for things? Perhaps they lack the despair. And one more thing. When Beckett was writing this, or when it was first produced, he used the word tragicomedy. He did not use the word absurd. It was used later by Martin Esslin. So when people go there, they go with an expectation that we are going to see a tragicomedy. So tragicomedy is a combination of tragedy and comedy. What does tragedy do? It shows a human being which is or who is greater than you on a more lofty position and making a mistake and suffering because of it. And in the fall of the tragic hero, we feel these, pity and fear and those things. So in a tragedy, the audience is in a comparatively lower pedestal, you can say, than the character. But on the other hand, in tragedy itself, there is something which makes the audience more powerful than the hero. In what? That they know something which the hero does not. That's why there is a dramatic irony. In Macbeth, see, we know things before Macbeth knows. So we see that this man is going to fall and we know what's going to happen. So that gives the audience a kind of power to follow the plot. In comedy, what happens? We see characters who are inferior to us, making stupid things, speaking in a stupid way. And then that generates laughter in us. Sometimes we feel uncomfortable that this man is exactly like me. So if I'm laughing at him, I should stop doing those things. So laughter as a corrective thing. And in both these cases, there is an engagement of the audience with the characters, especially in comedy. The comedy always depends on this reaction from the audience. Think about stand-up comedians. If they start a gig and nobody responds, they dry up. Therefore, in tragedy and comedy, there is a role that audience plays to generate meaning of the play. So the audience were expecting that this is a tragicomedy, so it will be a kind of a hybrid thing. But nonetheless, we will be involved to generate meaning. But when they went there, they saw that that superior position of the audience was not given to them. These characters, Estragon and Vladimir, let alone being connected with the audience, they were not connected with their own lives. So the audience had no entry to explain to themselves who these people are, what's going to happen to them, because nothing happens. And when nothing happens, there is a big problem. There is a direct refutation of Aristotle's theories. What, according to Aristotle, is an ingredient of a play? Like the unities. There has to be a unity of action above everything else. Then a unity of time, unity of place. We will see, while we read this play, how these three unities are completely destroyed by following them. And that's the best part. Had the playwright not followed these unities, it would have been a bad play, bad tragedy, according to Aristotle. But what he does is he takes these unities, maintains them cruelly, and then subverts them in a way as if he's performing a magic trick here. The sophisticated audience were not able to understand it, and they were offended. The convicts didn't have that baggage of understanding or intellect, so they could appreciate the raw beauty of the play. I guess you who is watching this video right now is a student and you haven't been to real theaters a lot. You haven't read many plays in your life. And trust me, that is why you are more capable of understanding this play than somebody who has a lot of experience in drama. So this is a blessing if this is one of the first plays that you will be reading. So over the next few classes, we will be looking at what Vladimir and Estragon do, what they say to each other, what happens to Lucky and Pozzo, who they are, and how time flies when these people are with each other. And who knows, we might have some realization into who Godot is or who he definitely is not. So I will wait eagerly for you in my next video, where we'll take up this text and have a thorough reading of its very important lines. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Till our next video, stay happy, stay subscribed. Bye-bye.